Okay, we'll call this meeting to order of the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board for May 18th, 2022. The meeting is emanating out of Sacramento, San Diego, Pasadena, and the Bay Area offices. We'll begin with a roll call of members. Please show Chair Block is present. Vice Chair Reeves.
Present.
Member Eng.
Present.
Member Allen.
Present.
And Member Kent Monning.
Present.
Okay, please show that all members are present. We will not be voting on the minutes of April 27th today. We'll put that over to the next meeting. That's item number 2. Item number 3 is the chair's report, brief report. First of all, I want to read a brief notice. Regarding the Zooming of today's meeting, it's a reminder that today's board meeting is being held on Zoom with members and staff located throughout the state. Video can also be viewed on the CUIAB YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to all our videos. Public comment is welcome by phone or by clicking on the Zoom link in our online agenda, located at cuiab.ca.gov under board meetings. Next, I'd like to just comment and thank our board members. It's only been 3 weeks since the last meeting, and you all completed more than 500 cases. So again, excellent progress. A lot of second level appeal cases resolved for claimants and employers. While our board was doing that, our field office judges at the first level appeals was hearing and resolving thousands of cases. So been very busy office. We have a big backlog. We are making headway. And I want to thank the field office judges, the staff who prepare these cases, and of course, my colleagues on the board. With that, we'll move to reports of the board members, starting with Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have a report this morning.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no report other than to, again, thank Pasadena Presiding Judge Whalen for accommodating me in the manner in which they have. I really appreciate their cooperation and providing me with a room and all the facilities.
Thank you, Mike. Member Allen.
No report, just a comment that I so appreciate our entire agency staff at every level, the judges, support staff, board members, management, and just to note once again, we're extremely busy as an agency, and as mentioned in the last meeting last month, we are resolving 20% of the nation's cases, so we're busy.
Thank you, Member Allen. Moving now to Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. No report, but I also just wanted to thank Acting PJ Hannah in Oakland here and those who have welcomed me to join today, in addition to our leadership and IT staff who helped me make this location change. So thank you to everybody who helped with that.
Thank you, Laura. We're moving on now to item number 5 on our agenda, which is public comment. I will ask if there are any members of the public waiting to be heard.
I do have a hand raised for public comment.
Okay, well, while the first person is making comment, that will give any other folks who want to jump on a chance to do that. Just brief ground rules for our public comment. First of all, it is in fact comment. The speaker from the public can make comments, but there will not be board members engaging in dialogue or any question and answer. Lastly, the staff will follow up if appropriate, but board members will not be following up. With that, we'll move to our first commenter. Please state your name and you have 5 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. It's Richard Miller, a familiar voice. My comments are just in reply to a letter I received from Mark Wu Sam stating some things that don't seem to be correct. I've complained, as you know, many times to this board because I've got 5 years experience as an ALJ. I work with the CUIAB and received promotions, received work product evaluations for merit salary increases every year since I've been with the CUIAB. I also received it while I was briefly with the Department of Social Services. In my public or in my official personnel file, there are no negative reviews that I'm aware of. And yet Mr. Wusam said that I was not hired for any position of the nearly 60 jobs that you've recently filled because of a work evaluation while I was with CUIAB. He said that I've been informed of that, and I'm telling you, I have not. Maybe it got lost in translation or lost in the mail, but I have not found any work evaluation that was negative while I was with the CUIAB from 2011 to 2013. I was at ALJ2 in the San Diego field office. Mike Cutri was a co-worker. Mike's always been a competent ALJ as far as I know, and I'm sure he's doing a good job as chief administrator or executive, but somewhere along the line, he made either a personal bias or age discrimination decision back in 2015 that I was not fit to be an ALJ. He said that there was performance issues, and yet I found nothing negative in my official file. So if Mr. Wusam has that negative evaluation, I'd ask him to send it to me and to share it with the board. You're welcome to. Also, he said that I was given the specific details. I have not received any specific details of a negative evaluation. If that evaluation occurred when Judge Cutri was the PALJ in San Diego, he had to reach back to 2013 to find my work product. If he still holds that against me here 8 to 10 years later, I think that's far beyond the reasonable reason to find me unqualified or not among the most qualified. I also have reemployment rights. In 2018, Chief Robert Silva reached out to the EDD when I was offered reemployment to not only change my status, the classification as ALJ2, he decided that my prior permanent intermittent was part of that classification. It is not. I also was eligible for reemployment, and he intentionally sent a letter to the EDD telling them that not to raise the issue of my eligibility under Rule 277, where I had more than 2 years of continuous full-time employment. I never worked a permanent intermittent schedule. So my eligibility that I've decided to object to was not to the classification, as Mr. Wusam indicated. It is to my constant denial of reemployment based on evidently a secret evaluation that I was never confronted with, never provided an opportunity to discuss, and it was very minor, if any, as far as I know. So I want Mr. Allen especially to review what my substantial performance issues were that he's been told by Judge Cutri keeps me from being among the most qualified and denying my reemployment. I come back to you time after time because this is a burr under my saddle. It is an unjust situation which needs to be clarified and corrected. If I was a bad ALJ, someone should tell me and tell me why, not simply say you're not among the most qualified. So if you have anything like that, Mr. Wusam, since you apparently are the only one who will respond, please send it to me. If you have particulars, please send it to me. So far, it appears there's a blackball against me. And it's a secret decision made more than 5 years ago based on performance more than 8 years ago. And you have new ALJs that have never been ALJs, and you have a good training officer, at least everyone says. However, you don't have enough faith in that person to think that any poor performance could be corrected by that person, that instead I should forever be held not among the most qualified. And that's because Judge Cutri is on record as confirming he does not want me to return to the CUIAB under any circumstances. That is certainly a denial of fair and meritorious hearing.
Sir, your time is up. I want to thank you for your 5 minutes of comment. And I will ask the moderator if there are any other members of the public who wish to speak.
Chair Block, I have no other hands raised for public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we move to item number 6, a report by our Chief ALJ and Executive Director, Mike Cutri.
Thank you, Chair Block. Good afternoon, Chair Block and board members. I will begin my report with the field operations timeliness measures, and I'll also provide some national averages for context in light of the nationwide state of appellate pandemic ongoing workload. I'll also address some of the field operations challenges and changes since the last meeting. As we discussed at the last meeting, the Department of Labor evaluation year closed in March. April is the one full month since then. That is the beginning of the new evaluation year. CUIAB remains in single digits of 30 and 45-day time lapse measurements, along with all of the other most populous states in the nation. It continues to be reflective of the elevated national UI appeals workload. We're still in a situation where the EDD has a backlog. It takes time for us to get the appeals. And in turn, we're resolving the oldest appeals first out of fairness to the parties who have been waiting. I've given special mention to that effort each month as it is reflected in our average case age. For April, the average case age dropped again for the fourth out of 5 months from 93 days to 91 days and down from a high of 105 days last November. At last report, the gap between California and the national case average widened further with a national average case age of 170 days, a full 79 days greater than California's. My thanks goes to the field offices for staying true to our mission of reducing appeal wait times as much as possible in these difficult circumstances. Through April and May, we saw, unfortunately, an upward trend in COVID cases and staffing impacts. Yet we closed another bounce back month in appeal closures, resolving over 26,000 cases, the second highest total in the last 6 months. Appeal volume from EDD hit a high mark for 2022 in March, but the trend has slowed as demonstrated by April, where we saw a 71% increase of transmittals over pre-pandemic levels. And if you recall, those were as high as 270% in May of 2021. So we continue to meet regularly with EDD to project future appeal workload. And the forecast that EDD has provided is that it is working through its backlogs with a great measure of success, and determinations are projected to slowly tail off through the end of this calendar year. As a result, appeals should do the same. We had, as I mentioned, some significant COVID impacts again since the last meeting. We closed the Bay Area office, the Sacramento field office, and the Inland office briefly for cleaning due to positive tests of staff. Both were closed less than 1 day and resumed full operations the next day with no hearings lost. Unvaccinated employees continue in the state's weekly testing protocol, which began last September. As I mentioned, the spike in impacts is a huge burden to the admin services staff. Every time an impact comes in, there's a variety of protocols and reporting that have to be tracked and maintained. So a huge thank you is due again to CUIAB's admin services chief Rob Silva and his team. They're staying on top of constantly evolving protocols and reporting requirements. So we appreciate all of your efforts. The admin services chief Rob Silva. In terms of recruitment, Mr. Silva is going to report on some of the staff recruitments coming up, but I'm happy to report that the 11th cohort of ALJs finished their classroom training on May 4th, and they've all joined their field offices focused on hearing and deciding cases. We're still in the process of scheduling the 12th cohort, but I hope to have that date pinned down for you by the next meeting. I do not have any security incidents to report since the last meeting, but I would like to briefly touch on the CAMS modernization project. The Fresno Office of Appeals begins to conduct its first hearings in the system today. So CIO Willoughby and I are planning to travel to Fresno in the next 2 weeks to evaluate the progress of the CAMS system and to help make the rollout team make plans for future rollouts. CIO Willoughby has lived with this CAMS project as much as anyone for the past 2 years, and I will happily let him give you an update as to its progress when his turn comes. And that concludes my report for this month. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Chief Cutri. Any questions or comments beginning with Vice Chair Dan Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mike, for that presentation. I have a question you might not be able to answer. It's a bit of a global question in terms of trend lines. According to the report, the UI registrations are up 27% over last year, 37% from 2 years ago, and 53% from 3 years ago. But yet unemployment's at a historic low rate. Is there been any analysis that can determine why our registrations for unemployment insurance keep rising, even though the unemployment rate keeps dropping? Is this part of the so-called Great Resignation that's gone on nationally? Has there been any sort of analysis that can help explain the trend line that we're seeing here?
So we do follow the employment trends, which in the past were very helpful in illuminating what our appeals workload might look like. But this is a little different. The EDD was so overwhelmed with claims early in the pandemic that it was forced to set aside much of its workload in favor of the timely processing of initial claims. So what we're seeing now are several measures of work that intentionally were not performed earlier on in the pandemic because they had arguably less importance than filing initial claims. So as EDD works through each of those buckets of work, we do expect a corresponding number of appeals to present with them. And that's what we've seen. And that is the importance of the regular dialogue we have with EDD, so they can let us know where they are in that backlog and how close they think they are to catching up.
Okay, so what we're seeing is a reflection of cases from that have aged substantially, potentially.
That's correct. That's correct.
That we haven't even received yet. So the day we get them, they're already well beyond the DOL guidelines and targets.
That's correct for many of the cases. However, if EDD hasn't issued an adverse determination, that clock does not begin to tick. So there are a number of items such as employer protests and other employer-related items where they provide information to the department of varying time after the claim has been filed. And so those sometimes take a lot longer to work through the EDD's queue. And then once the adverse determination is issued, it may come to us as an appeal. So it's not necessarily, certainly to the party waiting, it seems like the case has become old, but it hasn't yet been an appeal for much time when we get it.
Okay, and one last final question. Has EDD given you any sort of indication of when this massive backlog might finally get worked through and we'll start to see a more normal cycle of workload?
They are fairly confident that by the end of the year, they will have resolved their backlog and will then be working on all new work. And that would present, ideally for us, a pre-pandemic baseline where employment is quite high and the amount of claims and thus appeals are quite low.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Dan. Moving on now to Member Eng.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Cutri, forgive me if I'm repeating something you already answered, but my screen froze for a couple of minutes. The issue of the office closures during the past period of time since the last board meeting due to COVID, is that appropriate here, or should I wait for Chief Silva?
I described the number. We've had 3 brief office closures. Mr. Silva, of course, can get more granular if you have more specific questions about those.
Yes, I just wanted to know what was the number of closures.
I think you asked what was the number of closures, and it was 3 since the last meeting.
Okay, and I guess the question is to follow up, if I could. What are the procedures after those offices are cleansed? Is there any change in masking policies, social distancing, et cetera, or is it just a status quo?
So I'll let Chief Silva explain a little further, but generally we abide by the strictest of the locality or state policy in that regard. So we isolate the people who may have been close contacts of the individual who tested positive, and then it's a different application of those processes to each person who gets further away. So I'll let him give you a little more description about what the most current protocol is.
And I'll withhold the question until his report. So thank you. My second question is, again, I don't know if you covered this because for some reason I'm not hearing your full testimony. Can you go over the number of vacancies filed for ALJ 1 and 2? And what is your projection for future recruitment and vacancies, or future vacancies and future recruitment?
I believe that we have completed the most recent recruitment for ALJ 1s, and we are in the process of evaluating a recruitment for ALJ 2s, most of whom will be already existing ALJs in our agency. There may be one or two left over that haven't been filled, but Chief Silva can give you the very latest on that up to today.
Okay, and not to be too in the moment, but I noticed that we're still having bad audio issues, not as frequent, but on one day I saw as many as 4 in my entire panel. And I'm just wondering what's the progress on that and the prognosis?
Those thankfully were isolated. So they were isolated to 3 judges. And so we've successfully tracked down those particular judges. There were some hardware issues as opposed to the global recording issue that we had experienced earlier. And some of those cases actually were dating back to January. So it was a mix of our past impacts from recording issues and a couple isolated hardware issues. But those have all been resolved.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I have nothing further. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Mike. Moving to Member Allen.
I have no questions of Judge Cutri, but thank my colleagues for the good questions.
Thank you, Michael. Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. Same as Member Allen. I appreciate my colleagues' questions, but no questions for now. Thanks, Mike, for the good report.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, we move on now to our next report by Jody Remke, our presiding ALJ for appellate operations. Jody.
Good afternoon, Chair and board members. So I'll be going over the key performance indicators for April and bringing you the sad news of our failure to comply with the DOL 45 days or less. As you can see, in April, we only closed 12.8% of the cases in that time frame. I would note that this is a very close margin here, as when you go to the next standard of 75 days or less, we jump up to 95.9%. So we do clearly have a backlog going on in appellate operations right now. That is, I would start with just the reality that AO has a very small margin of error because of our overall numbers of cases we get and because of the number of ALJs we get or have. We only have 4.4 ALJs working in appellate operations, which should be sufficient based on the average monthly caseload. But in the past 5 months, we've had just a slight increase with the caseload, and at the same time, an increase in leave from ALJs due to personal reasons and some family issues that were unavoidable. So with those two together, there you go. And now we have created a backlog that we need to address. So as you probably have seen, we still have an RA working who's increasing her number of cases. We have a field ALJ who has a full caseload. I'm bringing back another RA who was helping in the field, and she's starting next week. I think between those, if the caseload were to stay the same in a few months, maybe we'd be able to get back to even. But I still think we have a little bit of a challenge ahead of us. So we are looking at other issues. And I would like to talk with Chief Cutri after this more about possibly even bringing up another FOALJ, again, for this immediate time frame. With, like I said, there's this close issue of cases in ALJs. If we were to bring on someone full-time like they do in the field, before you know it, we'd have too many ALJs and then not enough work. It's a little bit of a difficult dance. I would just also like to address the issue that was brought up last month as to how we look at against the national average. As I said, throughout the year of 2021 into 2022, California continued to be above the national average every month. Just for an example, they don't have their numbers up yet for April, but if I went to March, where California was at 60.8% for the 45 days, the national average was 40.3%. Again, that was kind of a low number for us overall, but at the 75 days, California was at 97.1 and the national average was 65.5. So obviously we're not looking so good this month. I'm hoping we can turn that around, as I mentioned, the next couple months. And that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Any questions or comments for presiding Judge Remke? We'll begin with Chief Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jerry, just to confirm for those at home, RA stands for retired annuitant.
Yes.
Who is a retired ALJ who will kindly come back and lend us a hand for a specified period of time.
Correct. And so again, it would be great if the RAs that came back would take a full caseload, but they also have
Oftentimes,
ongoing issues in their own lives, and they're coming back to help us. So I'm more grateful than the help and demanding of what we can do with them. And again, they just have their caseload unfortunately fluctuates due to those other issues.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jody, thank you again for repeated real-time informed guidance on the cases as they come up, and that's really appreciated, because sometimes if I wait to hear back more than a couple of days, then all the intervening cases kind of shroud my memory. That's not a issue for you, but it's more of an issue of me remembering cases late at night and wondering what happened to them. But I had a question about the 45-day target. I noticed that increasingly I'm seeing cases where the 45-day deadline is either the day that I see the case on my panel and sometimes the day before. And I'm wondering if that is a function of what?
It's a function of the backlog we have right now. And that's, again, you're seeing the fact that in April, we were only at 12.8% of meeting that. So yes, the vast majority of the cases you saw got to you at 45 days or later. And it's for those reasons I just explained. As Chief Cutri mentioned, just like in the field in appellate operations, we take the oldest case first because that is the fairest way to handle this for the claimants waiting for a resolution or the parties waiting for a resolution. So right now we're still continuing to be working our way through those older cases on our books that will be missing the 45-day. Again, the bright side to the DOL 45-day is a number for the Department of Labor. For the claimant, what matters is how quickly we can resolve their case. And like I say, when you jump to the 75 days, we're meeting 95.9% of the cases. So again, it's this window. It's unfortunate we're not making the 45. We're making adjustments, but again, we're trying to resolve these as quickly as possible and doing it shortly thereafter the 45 days.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you. Yes, that does explain, you did explain it. When I'm on a panel in which there's a 45-day deadline, sometimes there's a bit of a fork in the road, which is the 45-day means we should rush it. On the other hand, some of those cases are fairly complex. How important is it to try to resolve the 45-day that day?
Obviously, again, I think that goes to what we're capable of doing. I think it's better to get it right than get it done. So you take the time you need, but we are trying to get as many as we can done in the 45 days. As I mentioned, though, I think to the parties that appear before us, they'd probably rather see you do it on the 46th day and take that extra time if necessary. But again, it's just a balancing act right now. Hopefully soon you won't have to be working on that 45th day in too many cases.
Yeah, let me second that, Mike. I mean, our job is
Well
to get the
said.
cases right more than to get them done quickly. And of course, we want to be timely, and that's what Jody and Mike Cutri and other staff are working on, all the PJs. But our job is to get them right.
Well said. Thank you.
Is that it, Mike? Can't hear you, Mike.
Well said. Thank you both of you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, the screen keeps freezing up here. I'll have to buy a heater for my laptop because of everything's starting to freeze. But thank you, appreciate those comments, Judge Remke and also Chair Block.
Okay, we'll move on now to Member Allen.
Jody, no questions, but I think you know that I have great respect for yourself and all the AO judges. I think you guys do an excellent job. My only comment would be, just speaking as just one of 5 board members, is that I would be supportive of trying to bring on a couple of extra judges. I know in the past we've had some that floated between both operations. And I really know that I mean, I'll leave it to managerial discretion on this. But with RAs, sometimes by the nature of them being retired, sometimes you can almost count on them needing time off. So if it would provide more flexibility and give us a little bit more breathing space at the AO level, I'd be supportive of it personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Member Ketmoning.
Thank you, Chair Block, and thank you, Judge Remke, for the overview and for everything that our leadership does to try to hit the right balance with how many AO-ALJs we have. In looking at our report for the balance of open cases, I guess it's no surprise that we're approaching a number in April that is kind of in the realm of what the numbers were looking like in the spring of 2020. I don't recall how many AO-ALJs we had at that time, but I guess I just wonder, this gets to be some math and some crunching numbers. And I wonder if there are people with those skills that you rely on to help find that balance of when we pull the people to AO, what cost that is to the field. So I just am curious to see if there's any statisticians or things like that who help make some of these decisions.
Yes, well, Chief Cutri himself is very familiar with the numbers and the ability. I think everybody's looking at it. And again, I think as bleak as it looks when you look at both our percent this month and the overall pending cases, I think it is relatively small numbers we're talking about. And with tweaks, we can adjust for it pretty quickly. So again, I know nobody wants to see a missing the 45-day goal, but again, I think we'll be able to do that. And I've talked with or sent some information to Cutri, and I will continue to talk to try to address this. As I said, I think it can be done in a few months.
Thank you. And I do hear you with the numbers that we're working on. Just bringing one more person for a period of time would have a huge impact. So I'm hopeful that we will see that. So thanks. That's my questions. Thank you both.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jody. Moving on now to item number 8, a report from our Chief Information Officer, Jeff Willoughby. Jeff.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Block and members of the board. As Chief Cutri indicated, it's a great opportunity to start my report this month with some firsts. We have verified our first set of appeal materials from EDD. We've calendared our first hearing. We've heard that first case and issued our first decision in our new system. These represent new and critical milestones for the organization, and thanks go out once again to all the staff, subject matter experts, trainers, and especially presiding administrative law judge Hugh Harrison for serving as our project owner through the arc of this effort. His depth of knowledge and determination to see this effort complete are really testaments to his professionalism and his commitment to CUIAB. So I'd like to personally thank him for that. Now that we are working through live cases in our Fresno pilot office, it's also important to note that work on the system hasn't stopped. We're evaluating items that we discover as staff actively work now in the system, we are addressing issues as we find them. And we're also preparing improved training for the next offices as we launch them. In the coming weeks, we're going to be wrapping up the project deliverables and taking advantage of the support that the vendor is contractually going to provide us to officially close out the project. Last month, we had a question regarding our online check-in, which is one of the parallel efforts that we have undertaken to try and streamline how we interact with the public. And that continues to see consistent use. As of yesterday afternoon, almost 15,000 appellants have used that method to get necessary information on their hearing and to let the assigned ALJ know how to contact them. So it's likely we'll continue to use that method until the online portal is available throughout the state. And lastly, a quick update on another parallel effort, modernization-wise, the electronic document exchange that we've established with EDD, which are the transmittals now coming to us no longer in paper. Good news, and I reported on that in the past. It's working very well, and we are right at 25,000 transmittals have been delivered to us electronically instead of being sent to us through the post. So it's really nice to see those two efforts dovetail so nicely with the rollout of our new appeal system. That we're ingesting those files in, associating them with the appropriate case. And it's really good to work with EDD on something that is high priority for us and high priority for them, and to see it work in very short order. So that concludes my report for this month. I'm happy to take any questions.
And thank you, Jefferson. Questions or comments for CIO Willoughby, beginning with board member Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Jefferson, for that report. Those are very exciting milestones that you've just outlined. And as you continue to expand these modernization efforts, I hope they continue to go smoothly. And please thank the Fresno office for being the pioneers on this effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Will do.
Thank you, Dan. Moving to member Eng.
Thank you, Chair Block. And Jefferson, again, kudos for the work done on getting us to this point. And I look forward to the feedback from the Fresno office after today's CAMS launch. And thank you for all the work you do, also for your team that's always responsive to our needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Mike, member Allen.
Jefferson, no questions, but a comment. I work with a lot of community organizations as a volunteer, as well as working with this agency. And more I hear people saying they're holding their organizations together with Scotch tape and baling wire. Well, IT is our Scotch tape and baling wire for this organization holding this together. And I just want to thank you and your staff because you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a Swiss Army knife at our disposal if necessary.
That always comes in handy, yes.
Michael, Scotch tape and what?
Baling wire.
I still didn't get it.
Basically, it's substances that hold things together. Baling wire is like what you hold with hay together with baling wire. Well, it's holding things together. That's what it refers to.
Oh, so that's something farm boys know about.
Well, yeah, I'm out of Sonoma County, so what can I tell you?
Thank you, Michael. Moving on now to member Ken Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. Thank you, Chief Willoughby, for that update, and just huge thanks to everyone who's really going through the growing pains for our agency, the Fresno office, all the subject matter experts, the IT team. There's so much work that happens to then ultimately benefit from this new system. And it's been tremendous to hear about these updates and truly appreciate it. One question, I don't know if this is trackable, but I'm just thinking about how much paper is being saved, with what you're talking about and how these cases are now being heard without these huge physical files. And it would be so interesting to see, like when you're at the airport and you see that you're saving a plastic water bottle, how much paper is going to be reduced in usage with this effort. It's something to be additionally proud of on top of the other things to be proud of. So that's a question. I don't know if that's trackable, but it would be really interesting to see.
Well, it is. There's a page in the electronic file that it equates effectively to a piece of paper. And I will absolutely get this wrong, but I want to say that the average transmittal is something like 10 to 25 pages. And we've received 25,000 case files so far. So that math, it goes up pretty quickly, right? And that's since April 4th.
Well, that's another thing to be very proud of, the impact that our agency is no longer going to be having on the trees. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point, Laura. Thank you for your questions. Moving on finally to our number 9, our report by our Chief Administrative Services Officer, Rob Silva.
Thank you, Chairman and board members. I will go ahead and start with a quick hiring update regarding support staff efforts. And the field continues to do support staff hiring at a very aggressive pace. We have 6 new hires so far this month in May. We currently have 19 position actions pending in 6 different classifications. And of those 19, 9 are already in the name clearance or job offer phase. I want to provide just a quick, just a minor budget update. The EDD did confirm since the last board meeting that their respective UI projected workload for the 2022-23 fiscal year are such that they won't be submitting a budget change proposal for the spring revise of the governor's budget. However, EDD Fiscal Programs Division has also acknowledged that CUIAB's current projected appeals workload for 2022-23 is actually higher than what was projected in the October 2021 revise. Most of that due to what we've already been discussing at this meeting, this delay in appeals workload that's going to be coming our direction. Because the EDD won't be submitting a BCP for next fiscal year, to address the fact that CUIAB is projecting higher appeals workload, the EDD will be making an internal budgetary adjustment by transferring some positions along with the associated funding for those positions in 2022-23 from their UI branch to us, to CUIAB, to cover that effort. I will obviously go into this in more detail after we finalize our internal projected expenditures for the coming fiscal year, and we present the budget to the board at a future board meeting. I'll let the board know that it's a performance evaluation month. We issued a memo announcing the annual process of the individual development plans that employees can submit to their supervisors, as well as the performance evaluations for permanent employees. And those performance evaluations are to be completed by this May 31st. A quick update with regard to moving in Southern California. We recently had to transfer funding that we had projected to use in the coming fiscal year into the current fiscal year for our Southern California Moving Services contract. While that process has been in the works, we've tried to leverage EDD's moving transportation program for work that we really need done in our Southern California offices. And we have been unable to get them to commit to moves during this phase, which is one of the reasons we've historically had our own separate moving contracts in the first place, by the way. The funding amendment that I spoke of is about to be executed. So we've prioritized some, again, much needed work in Southern California, beginning with the removal of hundreds of archive file boxes in Orange County. And then we're moving to some old equipment, old furniture surveys for Oxnard, Inglewood, Pasadena, followed by even more surveys, as well as some space reconfiguration in our Los Angeles office. We've booked the Orange County removal of the archive boxes for June 1st already. I don't know whether or not they'll be using baling wire. And then the remainder of the work should be happening over the first couple of weeks in June. And I wanted to wrap up with COVID, and hopefully I can answer some of Member Ng's questions with my update. I was naively hoping that the 7 cases I reported last board meeting that happened in April was going to be somewhat of a spike, but I was way off with that hope. In the 21 days since the last board meeting, we have had 18 reported positive cases, the 18th being about 30 minutes ago, including yours truly. I was part of that group. As Chief Cutri mentioned, although we received almost 1 case per day over the past 3 weeks, it only resulted in 3 partial day office closures. I will say in each of the instances when we've received positive test results, local management, has been very proactive in working with me to ensure that those impacted employees quarantine for the required period of time, and that those impacted and other impacted employees receive the supplemental paid sick leave for which they are entitled as well. I will be gone next week and the following week, and I've worked with Valerie Graziano in administrative services, who's going to take over the helm for me in dealing with the triaging some of these positive test reports over the next couple of weeks. To address what I believe are some of Member Ng's questions, when we close, and what drives the closure of an office is if we have a report of a positive test in which the positive employee has been in the office environment within the previous 24 hours since the discovery of the positive test. With following Cal OSHA guidelines, we then are to close the office for deep cleaning. And that's what happened in the 3 instances over the past 3 weeks. If they have not been in the office for the preceding 24 hours, then no office closure or cleaning is necessary. If now, since this 24-hour rule has been in effect since the beginning of this calendar year, we've been very successful in obtaining same-day cleaning. But even in the event that if we're not able to, staff can still return the following day, because obviously more than 24 hours would have passed since the infected employee was present in the workplace. If the employee reports close contacts, then those close contact people are separately notified. If you're in close contact with someone who's tested positive, whether that's in the workplace or even outside of the workplace, an unvaccinated employee or an employee that has yet to show proof of vaccination, protocol is that they are to stay out of the office for a 5-day period, 5-day quarantine, and they test on day 5, and testing negative on day 5, they can return to the workplace. For close contacts that are vaccinated, there is no quarantine protocol. I mean, there are OSHA recommendations, but they're simply recommendations. As long as the vaccinated employee is asymptomatic, they can continue to return to report to the workplace until such time that they become symptomatic or test positive. With regard to social distancing before or after a positive test report, they should be essentially the same. We tell all management to not have employees sit for more than 15 minutes together in the break room, and to basically keep the social distancing rule, which is to not have a period of time in which you're within 6 feet of somebody for a cumulative total of 15 minutes. It's not completely avoidable. We do have some employees that carpool. We've actually had some that were close contacts due to carpooling. When we do have cases in which the employee, which we have a cleaning, we send a notification to the entire office to let them know. If there is a situation in which there isn't a cleaning, but an employee has been in the office during what's called the high risk period, which would be 2 days preceding the onset of symptoms. We also send notification to employees letting them know that that has happened. And that is the time when we also send separate close contact notifications to any people that were named as close contacts. And then I also contact the building manager to let them know of the positive case. And I'm happy to take any questions, especially if I didn't answer all of Member Ing's.
Thank you, Rob. Let's move to board member questions now. We'll start with Vice Chair Reeves. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Rob, for that comprehensive report. I have a couple budgetary questions. The governor, I think it was just last week, issued his May revise, which is an update to his January budget proposal. It's expected that the final budget will be signed and delivered in about 30 days. It makes sense to me that ED would not request a BCP, which is a budgetary change proposal, given that they expect their backlog to be resolved early in that next fiscal year. But of course, that workload then cascades to us. And while I appreciate that ED recognizes that fact, I guess my question is our budget subject to the director of EDD? Like, do they have control over our budget request? Can we not make a direct request to the director of labor? How does that process internally work? Because while I appreciate ED's posture, I want to make sure that we're not shortchanged in any shape or form.
Right, and EDD is the entity that submits the official budget change proposal for both of our departments. I will say that this current arrangement is somewhat unprecedented. We had a bunch of meetings with them to go over our workload projections as well as theirs. And I know they internally decided not to submit a BCP, but they also, without discussing it with us specifically, made this decision to essentially cover us for this delayed workload by this internal transfer of funding. It didn't happen with our blessing. I mean, I like the results, don't get me wrong, but we weren't part of that conversation with EDD when they decided to make that offer for us.
If you're satisfied that the solution that they've come up with unilaterally, so that does in fact covers our shortfall for the next fiscal year?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, I might simply request that we reach out to the director of EDD to ensure participation and collaboration when it comes to development of our budget. We are an independent bureau, and I think some deference should be given to that. I'm a little surprised that our budget's dependent on whatever the director of EDD dictates. While I think we could certainly work together collaboratively and closely and positively, I do think we should jealously protect and guard our own prerogatives when it comes to our budget. So with that, I'll stop and say thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that input. And I'm sure that Chief Cutri will bring that to the attention of the director of EDD. Let's move to the next board member, Mike Eng.
Thank you, Chair Block. Can you hear me by any chance? Am I breaking up?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, Rob, thank you for the report, and I wish you good health. And I'm sorry to hear about you being personally affected. And the report was fairly broad and all-encompassing. My only question remaining was, if someone that's been fully vaccinated tests positive, was I incorrect in assuming that that person need not quarantine and the office would not be closed for cleaning?
Yeah, when I was referring to somebody not needing to quarantine, that would be a vaccinated close contact of someone who has reported a positive test. If you test positive, regardless of your vaccination status, there's still is that there are a couple of phases of quarantine period that you have to follow. And I can go into detail for that with that right now if you prefer that I do.
No, I think you've done it before. Just logging on to that question, there is, as we've widely reported by the media, are certain drugs or medications, to use a better term, that can be taken. And I wasn't sure whether it was when the person tests positive or when the symptoms appear. And I'm wondering if there are any protocols with regard to the availability of those medications to our workforce.
No, the administration has not provided any sort of direction with regard to providing medications to the state workforce.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Mike. Member Allen.
Yes, Rob, you do have my wishes for a speedy recovery. And the major concern I have with the report, which is a very good report, is that when you use the word unprecedented, there's good precedents and bad precedents, as we know. This is a very bad precedent, in my opinion. We are an independent agency. I understand that we work together under the auspices of the Department of Labor. But I think that for a variety of reasons, I don't know why this occurred, and without any malice toward anyone, I just don't think it's a good precedent. And I think we need to have control of our budget in order to fulfill our mission. So that's my only concern. It's commentary, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Let me add just for a second too, that given our unique relationship with EDD, that we in fact, our judges serve as judges for their cases often, having them control our purse strings could be chilling. I mean, not to say that they would do anything like that, but certainly they could cut off funding if they're in charge of our funding, if we have an increasing number of rulings that go against them. Again, that kind of indicative behavior I don't anticipate, but it does set a bad, certainly projects a bad image. So I'll go along with the other board members on that. And let's move now to Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block, and thank you for my colleagues' wise input on the macro policy level with regards to our budget. I think it's quite astute, the comments that you're making. I just wanted to touch on the COVID protocol and thank Chief Silva and your entire team for, this is called the fifth wave going on right now. It's a tremendous amount of work. I hope you're going to be feeling okay. I appreciate your efforts and Chief Cutri's efforts. When I tested positive a couple of weeks ago, it affects everyone personally. Things get thrown upside down. It certainly affects the work that our agency does. And it's past 2 years that we've been dealing with this. So I just want to thank your entire team for continuing all these protocols to assure that people can be safe in our offices, with people who keep coming in every day and doing the hard work that they do. I truly appreciate it. So thanks to everybody. And I hope that you can rest on your upcoming vacation, Rob, and recuperate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And that concludes item number 9, which concludes our open session agenda. I'll turn to Mark Wusam and ask our chief counsel if there are any closed session agenda items today.
Thank you, Chair Block. There are not today.
Thank you, Mark. In that case, if there's nothing else for open session, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all for your attendance and participation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.